Today on Locked On Red Wings, should Detroit go back to defense in the draft? A draft profile on Carter Yakemchuk with Scott Wheeler of The Athletic.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I am formerly a broadcast producer for 97.1 The Ticket, where Scotty is the host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And today we are very happy to be joined by Scott Wheeler, national reporter for NHL draft prospects, with The Athletic. And Scott, you joined us last year to help us do some profiles. Thank you again for rejoining us. How you doing?
I'm doing well. As I mentioned before we hopped on here, I'm kind of between travel days, so you've caught me at a good time. I got back late last night from Saginaw, Michigan.
Let's go.
With some time spent in Frankenmuth, Michigan, and now I'm between. I'm basically doing laundry today, and then back on the road to Buffalo tomorrow for the combine, of course. So looking forward to the home stretch here, and before we know it, it'll be Las Vegas for the final centralized draft.
Yeah, I'm glad that we could interrupt your laundry day to get some good info out of not just Yakemchuk. We're going to talk Yakemchuk in segments 1 and 2, but in segment 3, you're kind enough to talk to us about the newest organizational depth piece in Jakub Rychlovský for the Detroit Red Wings, who signed an ELC on Monday. So we're going to get to that. But first, I got to let the people know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And thanks for making Locked On Red Wings your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Scotty, today we are going to be talking about Carter Yakemchuk, a right shot defender from the Calgary Hitmen in the WHL. And my first question for Scott is really like, what type of style of defense does he bring? Because nowadays we're kind of in an era of people really covet, at least fans really covet, that offensive style defenseman. You see your Quinn Hugheses, your Cal McCarrs, your Adam Foxes, but that's not the only style of defense, as we know. When we're looking at how he plays the game, how does he play it? Simply put.
Well, I think there are two things that sort of really bubble to the forefront with Yakemchuk's game. The first is that offensive quality that you're alluding to. He is one of the most talented players in this draft class, which when you're looking at a 6'3", 200-pound kid is not a small thing. When you're big and you can really, really, really make plays like he can, there's a lot to get excited about almost by default, even if the rest of your game isn't quite there. So he's got impressive handling ability, like through his feet, around defenders, made guys look silly a number of times this year, scored some highlight reel goals, obviously scored 30 goals, which is unheard of for a defenseman in the WHL. There's a lot to sink your teeth into with Yakemchuk's offensive game. He really does. I'm not sure it's special quality, but it's not far off. Like, we're talking about a premium talent, strictly offensively speaking. The other piece of his game is that at 6'3", he's also a really physical kid. That has really come in his game. I did a feature at The Athletic on Carter earlier I guess last month, now that we're into June, in May, and spent some time sort of speaking with people all around him, including his strength coach and people with the Hitmen. And the big thing is that he used to be, he's always been a big, strong kid, but he used to not play like it. And now certainly that's a big part of his identity. Like, he had 100 penalty minutes in the WHL this year. I actually think he took too many penalties and tried to make it too much a part of his identity. He's got a bit of a mean streak to him. He's fought a couple of times in the WHL now. So that piece of it, like, he's begun to really lean on guys. He's physical. He'll also slash a guy across the ankle and take an ill-advised penalty kind of thing. But there's a bit of a mean streak to him on top of the skill. I think part of the reason that mean streak has developed, though, if I'm being honest, is because his game defensively isn't where it needs to be. despite the fact that he's 6'3" and he's a righty, and there's something to work with there. His defensive game lacks a lot of polish. Like, he makes a lot of mistakes. I don't think he's a great skater. So, you get mixed reviews on his skating. Certainly his footwork and his skating from a standstill and his pivots and that kind of stuff is an issue. He's actually a pretty solid sort of straight line skater forwards and backwards, but it's the stops and starts that I think he gets into trouble. He just looks a little sluggish. I've spoken, as I mentioned, with his strength and conditioning coach, and he's never been a great athlete. Like, he's always sort of been figuring out his body in the gym and that kind of a thing. But I mean, you've got a big kid who's physical and who has high-end offensive quality, like a big shot, legitimate high-end skill, power play one quarterback type. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Brent Burns I've used at times, like just that sort of big offensively inclined. There were times in Brent Burns' career where he wasn't as strong defensively as others because he was trying so hard to play offense. Like, there's just a little bit of that in Yakemchuk's game where he's all offense all the time still. I think the defensive piece will come, especially because he's got the size to work with, right? So you just need coaching, and he needs to improve his skating a little bit and his decision making. But I think a lot of that will just come with time. And then if it does come, and if his defensive play gets to where you hope it can, suddenly you've got a stud, right? So it'll be interesting to track him. He's also on the older side of this draft class, which does kind of complicate it. Like, you expect a 6'3" big kid who's on the older side to be good, sort of like Nate Danielson a year ago. Like, of course, Nate should have been good in junior last year, and this year, like, he's on the older side. So there's a little bit of that with Yakemchuk as well, but he's like a legit talent.
He was only days away from the 2023 cutoff, was he not, as far as like birthday goes?
Yeah, he was. Now, on the flip side, had he been in the previous year, he was still a WHL second All-Star last year, right? Like, he's had 2 really good years, which is what you'd hope for from an older kid. So he's got that sort of feather under his cap.
For sure. Well, I mean, I think want to stick with the strengths here, and then I'm sure we'll talk about, some of the weaknesses in his game as well. The first thing that jumps out the page at you, as you alluded to, and as everybody who knows about him looks at, is 30 goals from a defenseman in a draft year in the WHL. That's historic. Like, genuinely, that is the word for it in that league. How do you see? I guess I'm trying to figure out how to word it, but I guess my question is, how do you see that goal scoring translate? Like, I think everyone's first instinct is just going to be, he's going to be a goal scoring defenseman as he gets, promoted and like moves up through the ranks. Is that something that you think is sustainable, or is it obviously the offensive side of the puck is going to be, where his profile is his strong suit, but is the goal scoring specifically, how do you see that translating, I guess, in his NHL career?
I think it should translate well. He's got the big shot, which automatically gives him another weapon on the power play. Oddly enough, some of the best defensemen in the NHL these days on the power play, guys who've been extremely successful, don't actually have big shots. So I don't think it's a prerequisite to be a power play quarterback anymore. Quinn Hughes doesn't have a big shot. Morgan Riley doesn't have a big shot. You could do it just as kind of a conduit, kind of an umbrella guy. But when you do have those other tools, and then you've also got the big shot, it just changes the way that teams have to defend you. I think it's part of the reason Evan Bouchard is such a good power play quarterback for the Oilers power play, is they have to respect him now in a way that they didn't have to, say, Tyson Barrie previously, right? So I think that's going to be a big element for him, is just the shot itself. But it's not the shot that's the most translatable piece. It's the way that he makes guys miss, frankly. And I think he's going to continue to even make good players and faster players in the NHL miss because of the way he handles the puck and his ability to go laterally on guys and sort of make that first move and lose a guy. So I think it's going to work. Like, I think he's going to be a goal scoring type of defenseman, and he's actually not a particularly like cerebral, natural playmaker. Despite the 30 goals, he was also only about 60 points, right? So it's not like he had a Zane Parekh style season where Zane had 30 goals, but he also had almost 100 points, or Evan Bouchard in his heyday when he had 20, 30 goals, but also had 50 assists. Like, I don't think he's got quite the the playmaking package, but from a pure skill standpoint, it's all there, and I think it'll continue to work for him.
Absolutely. So I have a question. You talked about his weaknesses being, his actual defensive game, and that's something I want to get a little bit more in detail in segment 2. So I want you to sit tight. I want Scotty to sit tight, and I want the listeners to sit tight, because we'll be back in about a minute here to talk about that in segment 2 of Locked on Red Wings. Going to talk to you guys today about FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Segment 2, Locked on Red Wings podcast. We are joined by Scott Wheeler of The Athletic. And Scott, you mentioned that the weaknesses that Yakemchuk has is in the defensive zone, that he's not necessarily tough to play against in regards to actually defending. You said he's very physical and he has a little bit of a mean streak, but in the defensive zone, there's definitely some gaps in his game. When it comes to that being fixable, I guess I'll say, or developable at an NHL level, do you see that as something that NHL teams and a team like the Red Wings perhaps could fix in Grand Rapids? Or I believe he has to play, one more season in the WHL before he's eligible to go to Grand Rapids. But is that something that you can see as fixable, or is his style always going to be more offensive oriented than defensive oriented?
Well, his style is always going to tilt offense, but I do think there is a gap to fill there still for him. I think the skating piece is the big one. You can improve your skating. It's my understanding in talking to his strength coach, there's work that he can still do there, which is positive, not negative. When there's still growth opportunity there, when he's still figuring out his body, that's actually a good thing, not a bad thing, because it means that there's something more there. There's something more that he can step into in terms of just getting a little quicker in the gym. I know they're doing a lot of agility work with him this summer in terms of ropes and that kind of a thing. So I do think we'll see some natural sort of athleticism progress there. He's just going to become more of a man, if you will. And that's going to help him. And then the other thing is the decision making. I think it comes back to how much he's going to be allowed to play offense. Naturally, his defensive game is going to get better at the pro level because he's not going to have the same leash to play offense all the time that he has in junior. And as a result, he's just going to have to sit back more. I think a lot of his problems just come from getting caught up ice, making bad decisions, trying to do too much, mistakes that way. And those mistakes are naturally going to cut down because he's going to have to cut them down in order to stick in a lineup. So some of it is just going to come with repetition, with maturity, with sort of time, if you will. Now, I still think his game's always going to come with some mistakes. I think you're going to have to live with that with a player like him. But you hope that he can be offset by, if you're the Red Wings, by, say, Simon Edvinsson, right? You've got to find a partner that works well with him. The other piece of it is that he quite frankly won't likely be available when the Red Wings pick. It wouldn't knock my socks off, if you will, if he were still available. But I think all 6 of the top 60 are going to be gone in the first 12 or 13 picks, which means he might go just shy of where the Red Wings are selecting. Now, could they move up, etc.? Could he fall if a couple of the forwards surprise and go higher than people expect? Sure. It's a possibility that he's there. But it does feel like those 60, and he might be the 6D for me, and kind of has been all year, of that sort of big group of 6 high-end D. So if there is one of that group that's going to linger, it's probably most likely going to be him. He does have some detractors around the league, but he's also got people who are really excited about what he might become. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes, but I do think more likely than not, he's gone.
Well, that kind of transitions into my next question, which was going to be, is there a world in which he's on the board for the Wings? And I think, you mentioned a little bit there that he might be like the 5th or 6th defenseman in that kind of short list. When comparing and contrasting him to the other defensemen in the draft, what is the reason for that? Is it just as simple as they're more sound defensively and that's kind of like all there is to it? Or is there, I don't know, maybe like more surrounding that conversation as to why he would be the one that may linger if there is, but most likely still not?
Well, I think in a Shai Buium's case, in an Artem Levshunov's case, in a Sam Dickinson's case, in a Anton Salayev's case, like there's 4 of the other 5. They're all better skaters. So I think that's kind of where it starts for a lot of teams is if these guys are comparable prospects and 4 of them skating is a real asset. I wouldn't say that skating is necessarily a major strength of Zane Parek's. He's the one that I left off of that list. Zane's got great edges, but he's a lot like I don't know the perfect comp for him, but he doesn't have that sort of strong straightaway speed. It looks a little upright in his skating posture. And as a result, Zane's not a powerful skater going forwards or backwards. So that's a piece of it. I think Zane is probably the closest comp, frankly, as a result, just because of the offensive tilt of his game. Very different styles in terms of the way that they create offense and the way that they defend and all of that. Zane defends exclusively with his stick, whereas Yakemchuk defends primarily with his body. But in terms of they're the 2 weaker skaters of that group of 6, and they're the 2 that are likely to linger, I think, maybe a little bit longer, although I still think Zane's probably going, if not 7 to Ottawa, then 8 to Seattle. But yeah, those other guys, the other 4 are just excellent skaters. And I think that ultimately distinguishes them from Yakemchuk.
So let's talk hypothetically, right? Like to piggyback off that question. Hypothetically, he is there available at 15, but you also have all of these other wingers, right? Because if you look at any prospect ranking, and I know Athletic has their own, that there's just so many wingers and a couple centers that are available between 10 and 20. And you're the Detroit Red Wings, who I know have a stocked cabinet right now in terms of prospects for both forward and defense. Does it make sense for the Red Wings to be a little bit more picky and like maybe choose the guy they think's the best fit for their system, or are you just taking best player available?
Well, I think in their situation, you want to revert from you want to pull away from the pickiness and go for best player available because you don't have to plug a hole. I think a team like the Seattle Kraken, for example, have drafted so well at forward that they have a clear hole on defense. And as a result, I think the Seattle Kraken are all but guaranteed to take a defenseman at number 8. The Red Wings haven't put themselves in that position. Axel Sandin Pellikka, Simon Edvinsson, Shai Buium, you go down the list, like it's a good group on defense. And then we know at forward, obviously the last 2 high first round picks, etc. Carter Mazur's established himself. It's a strong group. So they can afford to just take the best player available. Now, if Yakemchuk's available there, he might be that. If he's gone, though, I think it comes back to your other point where if all 6 of those D are gone, well, you start to count this 7 or 8 high-end forwards, and it's quite likely that 1 or 2 of the forwards is available in that scenario. So I think they're still in a good spot. A player like Konsta Helenius comes to mind as potentially falling into that sort of range for them. Now, Konsta, there are some similarities between Konsta Helenius and Marco Kasper and Nate Danielson, just in terms of position, where they're going to fit in a lineup. All 3 of those guys are probably excellent middle 6 centers in the NHL, but you can't build a roster around 3 middle 6 centers. So
right.
That's a piece of it. And then you've got the wingers, as you mentioned, Beckett Seneke, TJ Ginla, wingers that maybe offer you a little bit more juice in terms of dynamic quality than a Konsta Helenius, but are obviously wingers instead of centers, which is always a part of the conversation for NHL teams. Now, maybe the Red Wings don't have to worry about position as much as another team. Maybe they don't have to worry about going after a centerman, and they can take a winger who could potentially play with a Marco Kasper or Nate Danielson long-term kind of thing. So they've got options, which is a good place to be in. And they've done that by drafting a lot and by drafting fairly well with the picks that they've had.
Awesome. Scotty, do you have anything else on Yakemchuk?
Well, the last question I have is just kind of like Red Wings draft night as a whole, a little bit more in general, really quickly. Like every single person we've had on, we've asked this question to, and we've gotten an array of different answers. So I'm curious as to yours too. And this is such a unique draft in terms of the personnel, and I don't know why my screen just did a thumbs up there, but
did it do that?
It's one of those things where we always ask, is this a situation in which the Red Wings should move their pick, whether that's trading up or trading back? We've had people come on here and say that they would trade up if they were in the Wings' shoes. We've had people say that it's always smart to trade back and they should look into that. We've had people say stand pat. Obviously, some of that just has to do with how the board falls, and that's kind of hard to predict, nearly impossible to predict most years. But from where you're sitting right now, do you have a certain opinion on which one of those angles may make the most sense for the Red Wings?
Well, certainly when I look at their pool, I think the thing that screams at you, not just the pool, but the NHL organization, that they're truly missing is that high end piece. Now, the only way to acquire that piece is by moving up or by winning a lottery, which I don't need to rehash with you guys. Has obviously been tough luck for them over the years. But that is truly what they're missing. I think they're going to have a good group of 6 defensemen long term. I think Sebastian Cossa has an opportunity and Trey Augustine has an opportunity to give them a good tandem long term. I think they're going to have an excellent middle 6 long term. It's, can they get like where's that 90 to 100 point player, right? And how do you acquire that 90 to 100 point player up front? And the only way to do that is to pick a Macklin Celebrini or an Ivan Demidov or that type and have them really work out for you. And the only way to acquire those guys is by getting lucky in the lottery or by trading up. Now, it's tricky to, like, Ivan Demidov's, I think, going to be gone at 2, 3, 4, 5, potentially as high as 2 to Chicago. And I think he's the best bet after Celebrini in this draft class to be that kind of a player, like to be a point per game first line star in the league. I'm not sure you're getting that quite out of a TJ Ginla or a Cole Eiserman or a Consta Helenius or a Caden Lindstrom with the concerns about his health, or like you go down the list. They're all very, very good prospects in their own right, but I don't think you're getting that. And unless you spend $13 million on that in free agency or draft high, it's almost impossible to acquire, right? So that feels to me like it's the only thing that's missing, which means you'd have to at least consider trying to move up, but it's almost impossible to. I get asked this question by all 32 fan bases every year, and
it's easy.
Frankly, it
it's
almost
easy
never
question.
happens. And a year ago, how many trades were there in the first round? There were, and people who are listening to the podcast won't see this, there were this many trades in the first round last year. 0 trades. So I think it's more likely that they just stand pat, make the pick. The pick becomes a good player. I think the issue there is that the pick might just become another Marco Kasper, Nate Danielson, Axel Sandin Pellikka quality of player, which is an impactful player. I'm actually very high on Axel Sandin Pellikka in particular. But those guys are quite likely $6 million players or $7 million players if they hit, right? They're not going to be $10 million players. And they need to find that guy somehow. So easier said than done, I know, and it's frustrating, I'm sure, for Red Wings fans who know how hard that's going to be for them to find that guy. But that does feel like it's the answer to that question, doesn't it?
Yeah. We're going to head to another quick break, and when we return, we're going to pick Scott's brains about the newest Red Wing, Jakub Rychlovský, and ask who the heck he even is. So stay tuned for that in segment 3 of Locked On Red Wings. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are joined by Scott Wheeler, national writer, focusing on NHL draft and prospects for The Athletic. And Scott, it was honestly superb timing because I don't know what Scotty and I were going to say about Rychlovský other than he played in Czechia for the last 4 or 5 years, or his entire career rather, So I'm glad that you're on today so you can give us a little bit of a scoop on who Rychlovský is and why Red Wings fans should or should not be excited for him. So I guess the first question is who the heck is this kid?
Well, he's a kid that's been on the scene, believe it or not, for a while. He played, I believe it was 5 years ago now, maybe, at the World Juniors for the Czechs. Played in a depth role at that tournament, was effective. You could sort of see what he ultimately became beneath the surface there, but it's taken him some time. was a good player prior to this year in the previous 2 seasons in the Czech Extraliga, which is a decent pro level over there, one of the better pro leagues over there. And this year obviously took off and was not just an impactful player at that level, but one of the better forwards in the league this year, and one of the better forwards as a 21, 22-year-old. So what I like about Rychlovský is that despite being sort of 5'10" and predominantly a skilled guy, he's got some real pace to his game. Like he's a strong skater. He actually kind of reminds in other ways of Jonathan Berggren, except Jonathan Berggren maybe doesn't have that sort of boost, that giddy up in straight lines. I actually think Berggren is a great sort of edges skater. He's great on his edges and sort of maneuvering, but it's not a burning speed. He's more of a sort of navigator, if you will, Berggren. Rychlovský has some juice in straight lines. Like he's got some pace. He's a strong skater. He's got some speed. He puts guys on their heels. He can attack at guys off the rush. That part of his game, I think, is quite likely really what drew the Red Wings to him. He's also got sort of an NHL caliber shot, like with the speed and the shot and his ability to attack at guys. Like he's going to make some plays off the rush and that kind of a thing. Now the question for Rychlovský, I think, is the same question now, even as it was a year ago, despite him taking off, which is, I think everybody saw the talent and the skating and that piece of it and thought he was going to be a really good sort of pro top 6 player at a good pro level. The question is he going to be that for them in the AHL, or does he have a sort of small chance perhaps of becoming a middle 6 winger who can add some secondary offense to the team? And he's going to have to show that, not just in camp. I expect that he'll start Grand Rapids, but he's going to have to earn a call up and prove it on North American ice. Now, I think his game could work on North American ice better than on the European sheet, just because he does play with that jump, with that speed. But it's hard. Even if he scores 20 or 25 goals in the AHL next year and is a good player in Grand Rapids and gets a call up or two, it's always tough for 5'10", 5'11" wingers to become full-time NHLers. So that's going to be his challenge. Is he organizational depth? Like, is he a guy who gets called up and plays 10 games a year and gives you 3 or 4 points in those 10 games and is a top AHL offensive sort of second line or top 6 guy in the AHL? Or can he become an actual sort of top 12 forward in the NHL? And what does his role look like if he does? Can he become a penalty killer? Like can he sort of check some more boxes in North America? That's going to be the deciding factor for him.
Well, I think everyone's 2 favorite questions when these kind of deals come out are like timeline and ceiling, right? Like everyone wants to know how quickly we see, these players, and you alluded to it there. Like he's got to prove that he even is like NHL talent kind of period going forward. But timeline's always a big question. And then just in general, like you mentioned the skating and whatnot. In your eyes, just what is kind of, best case scenario? And I'm not trying to just like, put like unrealistic expectations on him either, within reason, obviously, but just with his profile and everything and all things considered going forward, what is kind of the best case scenario that you see him in the Red Wings organization?
I think the best case scenario is probably that he goes from call-up guy to middle 6 complementary winger who can maybe help out on PP2 and just gives you a little bit of secondary offense. Like I think that's ultimately the best case scenario here. I think it's more likely, frankly, that he probably is just a top 6 AHL guy who maybe plays some games for them. But him becoming a full-time guy would be what you hope for out of a player like him, and would be a really positive outcome, frankly, because they paid absolutely nothing to acquire him, right? So,
right.
I didn't mind the play to sign him at all. He garnered some interest last year. I went back and I guess it was March or April when I went back and watched him. I had a scout tell me, "Hey, you should watch this kid. He might get some looks from NHL teams in the spring," kind of thing. And spent some more time on him. I hadn't really watched him much. That Liberec team, he benefited from playing for Billy Tigre. That Liberec team, and HK Nitra are really the 2 teams over there that are producing the most talent over the last few years. Obviously the Yuricheks and Simon Nemec and all those guys, Sikora, and all the guys that have come through those two programs. So that helps. Like there are teams in those buildings semi-regularly to scout those teams, kind of thing. And he had a good year. Like he was a top player at that level at a young age. So like 22 is still young, right? Like he could become a full-time NHLer at 26, 27, and that would be a good outcome. Now he's going to have to earn another contract in order to do that, right? Like this contract doesn't run until 26, 27. So he's going to have to prove on this deal that he warrants another deal. Eventually he's going to have to probably sneak through waivers, right? Like it's one of those players where he's I think quite likely going to become a bit of a tweener, and they're going to have to make a hard and firm decision on him one way or another eventually. So they've bought themselves some time by signing him and by giving him an opportunity to come over and participate in training camp. And I'm sure he's probably going to be a player that they play in a lot of preseason games just to sort of really get a better look at him before making cuts and that kind of a thing. But quite likely he's a Grand Rapids Griffin next year.
I want to put my conspiracy theory hat. And this is the final question, and then we'll let you go, Scott. Let you get back to doing your laundry. The conspiracy theory hat that I want to put on is this signing maybe a preamble to the expectation that there's going to be some multiple graduations from Grand Rapids this offseason to the NHL level? We've talked a lot about Carter Mazur. Obviously, I think goes without saying at this point that Simon Edvinsson is a lock after how long he played with the Wings down the stretch. Marco Kasper, even Jonathan Berggren and Albert Johansson will become waiver eligible next season. So is a signing like this maybe also to add another body to the roster for Grand Rapids because they're expecting more graduations?
Yeah, I don't think that's a conspiracy theory at all. I think that's exactly the way that this has played out. I think you're bang on. Not all of those guys are going to make the jump, but Edvinsson,
it'd be a lot.
Edvinsson, by all accounts, is going to be, if not a top six guy for sure, maybe even a second pairing guy for them next year. And sort of play real, like 18 minutes a night kind of thing. Like I think that's the natural next step for him, and the right next step for him and the Red Wings. I think he can handle it. So that's a part of it. You have to hope that one of Kasper or Mazur sort of takes the jump next year, if not for 82 games, then maybe for 40 or 50. There's going to be some movement there. So, and that's good. It's a testament to what they've built in Grand Rapids and a strong team, et cetera, right? Like they had a good year. They've got some good young players in that group. There are also other players, I believe, like players that didn't work out in sort of a similar vein to Rychlovský, like Taro Hiroshi is UFA this year and likely won't be back. Yeah. And guys like that who are just not going to get re-signed, right? So they need more not lottery balls, because I think he's a calculated play. I don't think
he'll be
he's
a good
shot
player
in the
there.
Dark. Yeah, but he'll be a piece of that top nine, if not its top six there, and he'll be involved on the power play, and he'll have an opportunity to create some offense.
Awesome. Scotty, you good?
Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
No, I'm all set, man. We ball. I appreciate it very much. We appreciate you coming on the show.
Awesome.
Yeah, cheers, guys. Happy to.
Thank you, Scott. Do you have where can people find you? Where can people find your work?
Yeah, Scott C. Wheeler on Twitter, or X as it's called now, I guess, and everything at theathletic.com. We've got my final draft ranking, my final top 100, which came out on Monday, obviously. I will have mock drafts and features on the top kids and grades and winners and losers and all that as we sort of lead into the draft. So I'm really excited for the home stretch here. And we've obviously got, if you aren't subscribed to The Athletic already for Max Boltman's work, we've got a heck of a team, and Max does excellent Red Wings coverage.
Oh man, Max is a beloved friend of this show. We will tell you that with confidence, yeah. Scott. We love Max here on Locked On Red Wings. Again, thank you so much. As the month continues towards the draft, we probably will reach back out to have you back on. This was a fantastic conversation, and we appreciate it. Scott, thank you.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. We'll be back with a new episode tomorrow. Stay tuned for that. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.